the foundation of human nutrition being animal protein and fat. And then we figure out the nuances, once you're metabolically healthy. Because obviously my goal as someone who's training for a 50-mile race is very different than somebody who maybe has severe type 2 diabetes or is obese or even potentially is very underweight, right? So yeah, we start with the foundation and then we move out to the nuances.
Hi, and welcome to Sweet Liberation, where we are so excited today, Luke, aren't we, to be joined by the lovely Michelle Hurn, who has a gorgeous puppy in the background who's recently had surgery. If we hear a few little noises, we will just send our heart and our well wishes to puppy who's had some surgery. So, welcome to Sweet Liberation, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's our absolute pleasure. And you definitely are a lady after our hearts because you're a little bit of a rule breaker by the looks of it. You are you have written a book called The Dietitian's Dilemma. What would you do if your health was restored by doing the opposite of everything you were taught? Okay, welcome to Sweet Liberation. We just know we're going to get on with you today, and we just want to open up the floor to you to have this conversation. We know we're going to have a lot of fun in this time together.
Wonderful. I cannot wait.
Yeah, so tell us, Michelle, a little bit about your background and what makes you so passionate about what's going on with diet and nutrition and all the things that we are so passionate about too.
Yeah, so trying to give you the quick Reader's Digest version. My health journey really began when I was 12. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was about 5 feet tall, 57 and a half pounds. I apologize. I probably should have put that in kilograms, but very a BMI under 11. So, really severely ill. Immediately went into inpatient treatment for 2 months, put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And even though I became weight restored, I suffered with extreme anxiety, all kinds of GI issues. I was told as a 12-year-old, like, hey, people don't recover from eating disorders. Even if you are able to become weight restored, this is going to be something you're going to have to deal with for your entire life. And, I went from basically starvation to the standard American diet, which is very high in starches, sugars, the tube feeding systems back, 41 now. So back when I was 12, the main ingredients were corn syrup, maltodextrin, and soy protein. Today, the main ingredients are corn syrup, soy protein. They haven't really improved much in, the decades following that. And the doctors and dietitians were correct. I was very fortunate, became weight restored, but I had chronic anxiety, racing thoughts around food. I like to describe it as I felt like I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. As an adolescent, I'm watching my friends and family participate and have fun, and I'm thinking, ruminating, worrying about food. I wanted to become a dietitian, and I became an athlete because I just had this intuition that there was something I was missing. Because I'd seen nutrition take me from being very sick to weight restored, but my mental health was a mess. And as a young person, I thought it must be, maybe it's I need more fruits and vegetables. I need more antioxidants. I didn't fully understand, how the brain and even to some degree, human physiology, just how important bioavailability is, and we can get to that later. But I went through the internship, became a dietitian, and immediately there were things that just didn't make sense. We would go into the room with somebody with type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor would say, hey, we're going to teach this person how to eat carbohydrates consistently throughout the day and dose with medication consistently throughout the day. And I was young. I mean, I just remember asking, hey, isn't their blood sugar really high? Should we teach them to eat less carbohydrates? And the one of the main issues with the standard American diet, and it's very similar around the world, is it doesn't matter if you're overweight, underweight, diabetic, kidney failure, heart disease. The foundation is this very high carbohydrate diet. So I was kind of pegged as this difficult dietetic student. Why is Michelle asking all these questions? Just do what we tell you to do. And I'll never forget too, going into the room with somebody who had been in a major car accident and flipping over the tube feeding. And I'm like, oh, look, it's the same stuff when I was 12, where are the fish oil? Where are the anti-inflammatory? And I was told, hey, Michelle, it doesn't matter where the nutrition's coming from. It just matters we get them enough protein and calories. Stop asking questions. But you're young, you're trying to break in, you're becoming a dietitian. And when I did become a dietitian, I just, I saw the revolving door sickness. Patients would come in with type 2 diabetes, they'd be consistent carb diet, medication, they would get worse, kidney failure get worse, obesity get worse. And so you start to become kind of jaded. And I also had this just tremendous patient load. You know, you're given so many patients in such a short time to see them. And you, for every patient you have to chart. I would start to get anxious if a patient just had a conversation. I remember one woman was telling me about, you know, her book club, and I'm like, we got to wrap this up. You know, I couldn't even talk to people. And I brought this concern to my clinical director, like, hey, look, I'm overwhelmed. And she basically said, you're charting, right? I said, well, yeah, but you're checking the boxes. I mean, she didn't specifically say that, but basically said, like, don't worry about it. As long as the take home message was we weren't necessarily trying to heal people. We were just trying to keep the system going, right? And then fast forward to 2019, and as I mentioned earlier, I was an athlete. I became a distance runner, and I competed in college. I had a bad injury, so I stopped after my second year. But I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. And that time in the US, you had to run under 2 hours and 48 minutes. And I was at 2 hours and 54 minutes. And it just felt like all of a sudden my performance fell off a cliff. Like I wasn't recovering, I wasn't feeling well. There was nothing I was doing that was helping. And at this time, I was a very high carbohydrate athlete. You know, I was eating probably 350 grams of carbohydrates a day. And, you know, I was reaching out to friends, dietitians, like, what am I doing wrong? I had a blood test done, everything was normal. And two sports dietitians told me, like, you need to eat more carbohydrates. And I remember thinking, like, that's okay. So I ended up eating 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. And for context, I'm not a, you know, I'm 5'7", not a very large human. So my performance went from bad to worse. I had panic attacks that I hadn't had in a long time. I had to call out from work. I was driving and I started sweating, like just having this, now that I understand, this reactive hypoglycemia. And kind of the take home, or the, for lack of a better word, come to Jesus moment was I was at the hospital. So as what I was doing at that point as a dietitian, I was floating, meaning I covered different floors. So I covered oncology, and we had a very young patient pass. And so I ended up coming home early. It was kind of a sad day. And I just felt awful. I fell asleep on the couch. And then I woke up and it was like 2 a.m. And it just felt like my body was on fire. I wasn't even running that much at that point. And I think a lot of people can relate to this to some degree, is, you know, you do everything the health system says to do. You know, I'm exercising, I'm eating all these whole grains, I'm, you know, stretching, I'm icing, I'm meditating. And I was out of answers. I did not know what to do. I'm standing in my living room thinking, I don't know how to get out of pain. I mean, at that point, I'd use lots of ibuprofen, I'd use alcohol, I'd use some other things, and nothing was working. And so I grab my car keys and I drive to the gas station and get like 30 pounds of ice and just come home, put it in the bathtub. It's 2 a.m, probably by this time, 2:30-ish. And I'm just crying. I'm sitting in an ice bath, you know? And that's when my wife came in, you know, and was like, you know, maybe we should do something different. And I was like, yes, I'm done. This is stupid. I'm 36. I'm not going to run anymore. Screw the trials, screw competitive running. I just felt broken, you know, and when your health is very poor, you know, I think it's easy to, when you're in a really dark place, you only kind of think about yourself, like, oh, I hurt and I'm, you know, things are really poor for me. But because my health was so poor, it was extending beyond me. You know, I wasn't being a good partner. I was short and, you know, anxious with my partner. At work, I couldn't really show up effectively. It was a mess. And so I kind of intuitively knew that all this carbohydrates, a lot of this, you know, excess sugars weren't really making me feel well. But everything I had been told is, you know, to be a healthy human, you need carbs. And certainly to be an athlete, you need lots of carbohydrates. So, you know, if you told me, you know, it's 2024, if you had told me that evening in 2019, like, wow, this is going to be a really positive, pivotal moment in your life, I probably would have had some choice words for you. But it was because, you know, that next day I was just like, well, if I'm not going to run, why not explore a low carbohydrate diet? And that was, you know, kind of, that's where everything changed.
Wow.
Amazing.
That's amazing. And what did you switch back to then? So what is a low carb? Because for me, I understand low carb to be about 20 grams a day. Is that what is your definition of that?
Yeah. And so, initially when I thought like, okay, let's do this low carbohydrate diet, I wanted to do like a purely ketogenic diet. And I
Mm.
was honestly afraid. And it's now, it's embarrassing to admit this, but as a dietitian, I cannot tell you how it's just drilled in your head: carbs, saturated fat, bad, bad. And so, I was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I need to make sure I'm doing this correctly. I need to find some resources. And as I was exploring the ketogenic diet, I stumbled upon the carnivore diet. And I was
Mhm.
like, whoa, that is insane. These people are crazy. But as I'm looking at these humans, I'm like, huh, these are really healthy looking people. And at this point, I was not. I was a mess. And
Mm.
so, through social media, I reached out to several people following this way of eating, and everyone was very kind, gave me some basic, this is what I'm doing. And so I decided, I said, you know what, for 30 days, why don't I just do that? Why don't I try purely carnivore diet? And my thought at that point was, well, all this protein is going to be helpful, for my muscles, for potentially for my brain. I'm wrecked. And then, of course, as I'm telling my wife this, like, hey, this is what I want to do, she was like, absolutely not. Like, this is eating disorder. This will set you back. This is a terrible idea. I mean, we fought about it. She cried. I felt really bad. And she was just like, fine, do whatever you want. You're going to quit. And in the first few days were awful. Once again, I'm coming from, at that point, almost 500 grams of carbohydrates a day to basically none. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to somebody if they were. I didn't know about electrolytes. I didn't take any. I go, oh my God, I had the worst headache of my life that like second or third day. Come home and wife's like, how's it going? I'm like, it's great. It's great. It's fine. But by about the fifth or sixth day, I remember my muscles didn't hurt, and it had been months. And I kind of thought, well, I'm not running. This is the first time in a very long time. It's been 5 or 6 days without running. Then I was in a meeting at work, and I remember my coworker was kind of getting fidgety, and she was like, all right, I got to get a snack. I got to go. Do you want a snack? And I was like, Christy, we're going to eat lunch at like noon. No worries. And she goes, Michelle, it's almost 2. And I will never forget that, because it had been years where I hadn't had to eat every few hours. Finally I was eating and I was satiated, and I was certainly very odd, the odd dietitian. Everyone's eating bagels and oatmeal and whatever. And I'm here with my pound of ground beef and butter. Well, that's different. And then it was about the third week that we had the most kind of pivotal change. Corinne is my wife. She beat me home from work, which is pretty unusual. And she was sitting on the couch when I walked in and was like, hey, I want to talk to you. And, if anybody in a relationship with your partner in a very serious manner says, hey, I want to talk to you, it's not generally positive. It's someone's died or you're in trouble. So, okay, I went and sat by her, and she's like, hey, look, I don't know about what you're doing with your eating, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And we both were kind of like, whoa. And so that is what really led to the writing of the book. It was to dive in and to discover what is going on. How could I have, at that point, 22 decades of anxiety and eating disorder thoughts, and all of a sudden have such an improvement by doing the opposite, by removing plants, by removing fruits and vegetables, by massively increasing saturated fat and animal protein. And then, of course, we wanted to find, is this sustainable? Is this something I'm going to do long term? Is there nuances to this? So yeah, that's where that went.
Oh, goodness. Wow.
Wow. And how long are you still doing carnivore now? And when did it start? How long ago was that?
I only did pure carnivore for about 30 days.
Oh, okay.
Because after that, I was home more. I wasn't running. And
Mm.
so, Corinne kind of casually mentioned like, you should go for a run. She likes her solitude. And I was kind of scared, because I had based so much of my identity on being an athlete and a runner, and
Mm.
I'd given up, wanting to be competitive. And so I had to think about it, and I was like, okay, put my ego on the shelf. It's good to get your heart rate up. I don't know. Can you run with low carb? And so I, said, okay, I'm going to go run around the block, 15, 20 minutes. I'll be back. And I started running, and I ran an hour, and I was fine. And so, Corinne, she was like, oh, great, you're going to be a recreational runner. This will be fun. And that's when I was like, what if I ran longer than a marathon? What if we did ultra marathons? And so Yeah. And so that's what I do now. So no, I don't follow a carnivore or even a purely ketogenic diet anymore. I would say, animal based, very high fat, but carbohydrate. I use them specifically and strategically to really recover from running and fuel running.
Yeah.
And yeah, then that's what I encourage all people I work with. I think if we can just get this foundation right, the
Mm.
foundation of human nutrition being animal protein and fat, and then we figure out the nuances, once you're metabolically healthy. Because obviously, my goal is someone who's training for a 50-mile race is very different than somebody who maybe has severe type 2 diabetes or is obese or even potentially is very underweight, right? So yeah, we start with the foundation and then we move out to the nuances.
Yeah.
That's
Wow, that's
incredible.
amazing.
A proper
One of
rebel
the
and a rule breaker.
I was just
Oh
going to say,
yeah, I mean, I didn't last long in the hospital setting after having your health restored. I very naively thought that my clinical director and dietitian coworkers would be very excited. Well, and not just with my personal, I mean, everyone's casually happy when you're like, oh, cool, good for you. But because of my improved health, I immediately went to see what the research says. Like, why wasn't anybody, is there research on this? Why wasn't I at least exposed to this as a dietitian? And I don't know how to put it, dumbfounded, angry, enraged. I kept looking at all this research on ketogenic diets and type 2 diabetes. Like Eric Westman has done so much work. Satish Shavani, it was like, what? There were hundreds. And so I was like, oh, I put together this huge file and I went to my clinical director and said, we can do magical work with our type 2 diabetics. And it was just, I mean, almost kind of like pat on the shoulder and laugh. Like, no, we're not. We have to follow the guidelines. Thank you. Glad you're feeling better. So,
wow. I think also one of the things that when I used to competitively cycle, it was a big revelation to me that I found out that there were 5 times the calories in a fat molecule to a carbohydrate molecule. For me, that was groundbreaking news. So fueling from fat, and also particularly coconut oil, which is in between carbohydrate and fat in terms of the way your body metabolizes it. And those are some of the things that I found out fairly recently. And it's important that we share stories like that.
yeah, I think especially for ultra endurance athlete. I mean, even if you go to a marathon, and this isn't, once again, I'm speaking freely. This isn't being judgmental. This is just being my observation.
Yeah.
A lot of people running marathons are overweight. And I remember thinking that's very interesting because if it was purely calories in, calories out, everybody should be lean and fit,
Yeah.
right? Because you're training maybe on the low end 20 to 30 miles a week, on the high end maybe 60, 70 plus miles a week. And so the question was like, what's happening? Why are people fat that are running marathons? But what I saw, certainly I appreciate as an athlete, is just how important insulin is. And like I know Dr. Bickman, Dr. Barry, Dr. Hampton, a lot of us that are on the American Diabetes Society board, one of our beliefs and hypothesis is disease is just hyperinsulinemia. We just have too much glucose, too much insulin. The human body, the poor pancreas was not meant to secrete insulin so often. And so what is somebody, let's just say a woman who's like, all right, I'm going to go train for a marathon, maybe wants to lose a few pounds. But what is she told to do? Well, have carbohydrates before you run. What happens when you have carbohydrates before you run? You have a blood glucose response, insulin, can't oxidize fat.
Right.
Insulin suppresses fatty acid oxidation like nobody's business. It's like falling off a cliff. It's not like it slowly titrates down. I wish people taught this. And what does that mean? That if I cannot burn fat when I run, about 20 to 30 minutes into my exercise, I have to take in more. That's why they have those goos and gels and Gatorades. We should be able to burn our own body fat. The human body, we want to be metabolically flexible, meaning we want to burn both fat and carbohydrates. But when you follow a low carbohydrate diet, or when you even train your body to, run fasted, or to, if you're doing really long runs, at least wait till 45 minutes to an hour into your run to start taking carbs, you can oxidize so much more fat. And all of us have unlimited fat. Even super duper duper lean people theoretically have enough fat. I think it's several marathons you could do back to back to back. But we just don't train our body to do that. So we have the general population taking in carbohydrates before activity, during activity, after activity, all day long. And then we have the general population who's not active, taking in carbohydrates before, during, like all day long. And we can't pretend to be dumbfounded that society is overweight, depressed, and just miserable when we literally are causing insulin responses all day long.
I'm absolutely astounded as well, Michelle. I come from a healthcare background, although I haven't been practicing in our healthcare system in the UK for a number of years. But again, dumbfounded, really dumbfounded by some of the misinformation. And I was very, very blessed, I have to say, opposite clinical experience to you, working in an outstanding unit in London where actually a lot of research was happening on diabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes. And so we were talking to our patients and our women to tell them to kind of eat a kind of a more restricted carbohydrate diet, not a massively low carbohydrate diet, but they would measure, say, look, no more than a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of rice, and then make everything else green vegetables and good protein and good fats, talking about adding butter and cheese and things like that, just to get that, that insulin spike to stop. And I thought every other unit in the country was doing that. And then I've since found out by being told stories of, and I kid you not, an actual diabetic nurse telling a diabetic patient there is no relationship between food and diabetes. I was like that. And so, yeah, unbelievable, isn't it?
It's ridiculous. And when I worked in the hospital unit, I found it very interesting, talking. And first of all, I want to say nurses are absolutely incredible. I could not be a nurse.
Yes.
Holy cow. Some of the things that they deal with are amazing humans. But often when, the nurses would get you deliver trays, they would have to give the patient insulin before they ate. And I would even talk to, I would say, wouldn't it just make more sense? And they would say, oh yeah, like it's almost like people knew and appreciated it, but to some degree, but it was just not what we were going to do. It wasn't what patients were actually ever going to follow, type of thing. So I do think, like you said, I think there's such a misinformation around what humans need to eat, and the amount of garbage that is out there is, I can't imagine, I often think about, like, what if you had a severe, like, alcohol addiction or drug addiction, and everywhere you went, you were offered like a beer. Like, hey, like, here's an example of sugar. Like, I'm a sports fan, literally looking at sports on my phone. I get an ad for macaroni and cheese. I'm driving past the gas station. There's a banner. You go into the gas station. I have to take my dog who's had surgery. Our vet has a free, like, mocha machine thing. I had to pick up some air filter at Home Depot, a hardware store. They have Coca-Cola. Like, it's everywhere. And I think as a society, we've started to think and embrace that we wouldn't have these things. They wouldn't be provided to us if they were truly dangerous for us. And we're also such a quick, instant gratification, quick society. Now with Amazon, if something takes more than like a day to get here, I'm like, where is it? I can Google something in 30 seconds. And so the fact that I used this kind of thought process the other day with a young woman I was talking to. I said, if you saw your 4-year-old about to drink bleach, how fast would you run to knock it out of her hand? And she said, I don't care if I had to pull a hamstring, I would knock it out of her hand. And I said, if you saw a 4-year-old drinking Coca-Cola, you running that fast? Because even if it causes the same or worse, damage over time, we don't fully appreciate and embrace that like we do something that's immediate. And that's partially human nature. We're never going to be like that. But my goal, my hope is that people really start looking at what they're eating every single day, is just how this is going to come around and impact you. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I've been a dietitian since 2009. And let's just say, even 5 years ago, I'm seeing children younger with type 2 diabetes. The youngest person I've seen was 8. When I was in high school, we used to call it adult onset diabetes. Correct. And now it's, 8. My second oldest sister, I have 3 older sisters, is a surgeon. they are having more problems and complications in surgery because people cutting through more fat layers. Think about cutting a steak. You know, if you cut the fat, it kind of wiggle. You just straight through muscle, it's fat. Think about how much more difficult this is. You know, we're seeing people with heart disease. I saw the youngest person I've ever seen with the O2 saturation of 60 and congestive heart failure. He was 27. You know, so this isn't, people are getting sicker younger. And so this is why, you know, people are like, oh, whatever, when I'm 90, you know, no, this is happening. This is a problem. And so the best thing we can do, in my opinion, is you know, if you're a parent, like lead by example. You know, if you're a young person, like start getting those habits. Because we know if you start habits now, you're going to be so much more likely to continue them. And you asked me a little bit earlier, like, how long have I been doing carnivore? I mean, now I would say like a modified keto. I've been doing that since 2019. Why? Why am I doing this since 2019? Because, you know, people go on a quote unquote diet. They go on it for a week, a month, and they're done. I'm doing this because it's sustainable. You know, the research on ketogenic diets they are the most effective and sustainable diets. People like eating beef and butter. It's delicious. People like, you know, and once you're metabolically healthy, you can certainly include small amounts of, you know, berries or whatever you want. So we just really have to get back to sanity when it comes to nutrition.
Amazing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What about you, Luke? It's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yes. And so when somebody comes to you, is it do you recommend carnivore to them, or do you suggest doing it for 30 days and seeing how they feel? How do you approach that with your the people that you're consulting with?
Yeah, and you know what? It all depends. And I think this is where you also have to be really careful. I think if you ever have someone that says this is the only way we ever do things all the time, I think you should run the other direction, because there's a word for those people that rhymes with vegan, and I think they're wrong. So what, but once again, I go back to that foundation. I will die on the hill. I think the research is there that the foundation of human nutrition is meat and fat. But for example, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, you know, I've been doing the standard American diet. I'm having terrible results. I'm not ready to give up this and this, you know. That's one thing, right? Like maybe we just start by, okay, let's start by eliminating processed food. And it also depends, like, are they where are they at? How much time do they want to invest? If somebody comes to me and I've had this like severe autoimmune issue, like I'm inflamed everywhere, sometimes even like the, you know, rashes all up and down. It's like we got to find out what's causing this, you know. And I think often a carnivore diet is the best approach for that. You know, sometimes people with eating disorders and it's hard because, you know, I've had families even come and say, look, our daughter is at a stable weight, but she's so anxious and she's super excited about a carnivore diet. So, but we're not ready to do that. So maybe we do a modified carnivore diet. You know, instead of having 300 grams of carbs a day, we really increase your meat and fat. Recently did this with a family to where, you know, as opposed to having 60% carbs, you're having 60% fat, but you're still having a few whole food carbohydrates. So yeah, I mean, almost with rare exception, people will be on a low carbohydrate diet if they're working with me. And low carbohydrate is relative. Once again, you know, I would say I'm on a low carbohydrate diet, but I eat 100, you know, sometimes more than that grams of carbs a day. But I'm also, you know, went and ran 15 miles this morning. So if you're not doing that, it's different. I have had people reach out and ask like, hey, look, I feel like I hear you, but can you help me with you know, the word balanced diet? And I'm not the dietitian for you. I'm not helping you keep your insulin levels high, because I ultimately don't think that's going to help you.
Yeah, and have you had any consultations with people who are very for ethical reasons or maybe religious reasons that don't or can't eat meat? Is there anything that you kind of modify in their diet around a kind of more low carbohydrate diet that is maybe not meat based?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the ethical reason I want to talk about that if they want to talk about that, you know, because I think we know that 7 billion animals die in vegan agriculture. So if you really are doing it for the planet, unfortunately you're wrong. You know, the regenerative agriculture is one of the best things for the planet that uses both plants and animals. If you're doing it for a religious purpose, then that's something that I'll let you and Jesus work that out. I'm not going to argue with that. So I definitely, and I'm working with a company right now. I have a contract similar to Verta Health. Very, very cool. We can talk more about that. And I do have somebody who is, we'll just say mostly vegan. We're working on eating some eggs. And so you can do that. You absolutely can. And I do think, I always want to be inclusive. I just want to make sure people are doing it for the right reasons. Like if you really think veganism is better for the environment, I have a lot of data to say that unfortunately isn't true. But if you're doing it once again for religious reasons, we can absolutely use, certainly if you're able to eat like eggs and cheese, that's great. If you're purely vegan, most of those situations we've had to use a little bit of like protein powder type stuff, which I'm not a huge fan of, because if you use lentils or you use peas or beans, those things are very high in carbohydrates. And so, you can certainly do some of like the tofus and things like that. But then I'm always concerned, too much soy. There's some research that might not be ideal for certain people. So, but to answer your question, you can do it. You can absolutely do it. It just is it's more challenging if you're not going to be eating animal protein.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've talked about this a lot, haven't we, Luke, about how to kind of balance that out and approach that so that people feel included as well. But it's great that you're able to kind of embrace all of those people that you are helping. It's brilliant.
And it's also, I'd also say it's it's great to hear both sides of the the story, really, because we've had people that are a staunch vegan, and obviously they have a lot of information about why the things like veganism is good for the planet. And it's actually really one of the things I've really enjoyed about the podcast is actually being educated. So it's fantastic having people like yourself on that can actually share all of this information, and then we can then put it into the pot, and it sort of then people can decide what's right for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And and that's why I'm such a fan of regenerative agriculture, because people often will look at industrial factory farming and say, oh, that's inhumane, and they're not wrong. That isn't good for the land or the planet, right? But when we do the like regenerative agriculture, and there's actually a huge study done with a regenerative farm out here in the US in Bluffington, Georgia, they use every part of the animal. I think when I think about them, I think about like the Native Americans, right? Like they use the hide, they use the stomach, they use the bone, they use every single part. And even things that get composted, the blood goes back into the ground. And they actually showed that their beef that they produce, for every pound of beef they produce, they're actually sequestering carbon back into the soil. It's actually net positive. It's actually good for the environment. So here you are producing a nutrient dense animal product that the human body can use and absorb, and it fuels your body and brain very well, and you're helping. And I also say to people, like, if you're really concerned about the environment, in the US especially, one of the number one contributors to greenhouse gases is healthcare. So I think it makes more sense to become a healthier human than to not eat nutrient dense animals.
That's brilliant. So just for people that are listening, because I know we've got listeners from all over the world, and they'll be so interested and keen to hear your story. Your story was just wonderful to hear, and thank you for sharing so authentically. So kind of give us an idea, because we're such a treat to have a healthcare professional with us. Give us maybe some ideas about how people can get started if they're just taking stock and they're going, do you know what, that high carbohydrate cereal breakfast, and then the snack in the mid morning, and then a big pasta lunch, and then the rice for dinner, it is definitely pushing my insulin up. I can feel that spare tire. I'm feeling tired. I get that carb coma. Where can they start? Let's get them started. Where can we get started with this change?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think the first thing, I would say to anybody is, this is not your fault. If you have been to a doctor, if you've been to a dietitian, and people have said like, you just need to eat less, work out more, what's your problem? You have been given terrible advice. Even Googling right now will give you terrible advice. And what I saw happen a lot in the healthcare industry is and once again, a lot of the medical professionals I work with were fantastic, had good intentions, but there was this kind of resounding idea that the patient was just lazy. It was really the patient's fault. But the guidelines are the problem. The education you've been provided is the problem. So first of all, take away the guilt and the shame. This is not your fault. Second, I encourage people, before you even really start to change, like, get really honest with yourself. I like to call it like radical honesty. I think about that evening when I was in the ice bath. My life was a mess. Like, and this isn't the time to be like, woe is me. This is just the time to be really honest. Like, hey, I feel awful every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm so tired of feeling like crap every time I come home. I don't have energy to play with my kids. I don't like my job. Like, whatever it is, just take a minute and just like write some stuff down. Because what you put in your body, your nutrition, like the human body and brain are amazing. Their ability to heal is greater than anyone has ever allowed you to believe. Like, this is fantastic. But first of all, like, take stock. Like, where am I right now? And then from there, I think it really behooves you to go through kind of like a typical day and maybe even just write down like what you eat, because sometimes people aren't even aware of like, oh wow, you know.
Yeah.
And then, I think it's so good if you're able to, if you have the resources, get with a dietitian or a health coach that can really help you move through this. Because you can even have the knowledge, like you can listen to this and get super excited and say, all right, I'm gonna eat 3 low-carb meals. And you're like, I don't know exactly what that means, what that looks like. I went to grandma's birthday party and had cake. What do I do now? Like, change is really hard. And food is something you do several times a day. So I think, I think those are kind of like the first steps. And there's a ton of, now, gosh, when I first started, there's even more. Like, it's been, 5, 6 years of, books and other things that can kind of help give you an idea. But yeah, that's where I would start. Radical honesty, get with somebody if you can, and then, kind of giving yourself just kind of like a template too. This is where I'm starting. And then you can work with someone to kind of figure out like, this is where we want to go.
Brilliant. Brilliant advice. Brilliant advice. And what do you think about kind of restricting carbohydrate in children? Because you said you've seen children in your clinic, and how do you kind of manage a sort of more moving away from the standard American diet with kids?
Yeah. It's funny because just the word restricting really scares people,
Mm,
right? Especially when you work with someone with eating disorders. They're like, "Oh my God, restrict, ah." But what I really encourage people to kind of look at it like is we are healing your metabolism, you know? Um there's a very good graph the diet doctor has that just shows what carbohydrates, what protein, and what fat do to glucose and insulin. And so, clearly carbohydrates causes big spike in blood glucose, subsequent spike in insulin. So if we're trying to reduce that, we can absolutely reduce that. And just reminding people, hey, look, the human body's requirement for carbohydrates is 0. The fact that the American, standard American diet says 6 to 11 servings is purely based on, well, it's based on a lot of weird stuff, but now it's just corporate profit. It has nothing to do with human health. If you take a look at human health, it's not going so great lately, right? So what we usually do, just kind of similar to what I was talking about with the young lady I was working with that had an eating disorder, is in most cases we don't have to eliminate it. And I have had some young people that do. One young person had just severe autoimmune rash all over their body. One person it's just severely obese. I mean, we're talking you know, um, under 5 feet tall, over 400 pounds. Like, in cases like that, where your A1C, I'm sure the numbers are different, but in America, anything over like 5.7 is, considered pre-diabetic. This person's at 9. So there are instances where you can do that. But anytime you're planning a nutrition plan, I always say, we call them therapeutic carbohydrate restricted diets, but we'll always say well planned, because that doesn't just mean like, okay, now I'm just eating chicken breasts, or now I'm just eating something really lean. You need protein, you need fat. Those are the 2 things in your diet you absolutely need. And when I'm constructing a diet, I also want there to be lots of the micronutrients. I want there to be lots of zinc and iron and folate and all those other things. And unfortunately, carbohydrates are really not super nutrient dense, especially the carbohydrates we consume, the cereals and breads. I mean, those things are worthless. Sometimes they have added nutrition. So, but yeah, I've seen kids do great. Kids really thrive. My nephew's a type 1 diabetic, and he plays soccer, and, he follows a relatively low carb diet and uses carbs strategically around his soccer. So just kind of getting maybe more education to people like, hey, you don't really need this, and you're actually going to feel a lot better. And usually kids, especially people are motivated to when they see progress, when they start to see some weight loss, when they start to feel better, when they don't feel that blood sugar crash, because for a lot of people, when they're eating a lot of carbs, they get those periods of like almost dizzy, shaky, anxious. So if we can eliminate those too by removing a lot of carbs and just increasing your protein and fat.
Yeah. That
Wow.
that is brilliant. It's brilliant. And when people want to work with you, Michelle, I mean, what are you kind of offering? Are you offering programs? What is how do people reach out to you?
Yeah, I have a website, the dietitiansdilemma.net. And that's where you can contact me. I do yeah, it kind of depends. Right now I have a few spots. I have a few people that will see me weekly, see me bi-weekly. Sometimes people just say, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Can we have, we can do a 45-minute call and just review and do a one-time thing and, do like a meal outline." Some people are great. They get one-time thing and they run with it. Most of the time I follow up with people once or twice at least. And yeah, so I'm always happy to see people. I am on social media as well. I'm off social media until the beginning of November. So depending on when this comes out, I've taken a little social media sabbatical. But at Run Eat Meat Repeat is my Instagram, and then on X at Michelle Hurn RD.
That's amazing. Amazing. And are you competing in any ultra marathons coming up soon? We cheer you on.
I am. November 2nd is it's a 50-mile race out in Chicago. So I'm very excited for that. I've been training for several months. So, the goal to see if I can run under 6 hours and 45 minutes.
Wow.
Let's say it's a lot. I'm so blessed. It just feels so awesome to have a healthy body. It's wild. Several years ago, I thought I wouldn't be able to run at all. And now to be able to compete at very high distances. But yeah, so I'll be doing that, and then I'll be taking a rest break after that.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Any final words from you, Luke? Anything you wanted to ask Michelle before we
Yeah, no, it's been really, really interesting and informative. It's fantastic because this is exactly what our audience, when they're getting from the podcast is this information, the views that the guests coming on. And it's been absolutely amazing. So yeah, thank you so much. It's been fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And
Yes, any last encouraging words? I think they were just about to come out of your mouth.
gosh, I mean, I think the thing that I always come back to, and I know I said this earlier, but I'll say it one more time, is that the brain and body have just such a tremendous capacity to heal.
Mhm.
I've worked with people before that they've come to me and said, "I have no hope. I am hopeless." And
Mhm.
unfortunately, depression is the number one cause of disability worldwide. And so
Yeah.
if you're somebody listening to this that you or someone is dealing with depression, anxiety,
Mhm.
just there is hope. Once again, shifting how you eat can have such a powerful impact on your brain. I highly encourage you to seek out resources. There's great Dr. Chris Palmer, Dr. Georgia Ida, both written fantastic books. I leaned heavily with Dr. Palmer on my chapter on mental illness in my book. So just yeah, um, that's all I've got.
Thank you.
Amazing.
That's
Thank
lovely.
you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Sweet Liberation, Michelle. And I'm sure that our listeners and viewers will be reaching out to you and tapping into your wisdom. Thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.